Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna. So we'll move to the Bhagavatam. I'll chant the invocation 3 times. I'll leave a little pause in between and you can all chant yourselves at home and then we'll start. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Hare Krishna. So we did a little bit last week on verse 2. There's more we could do, but I want to move ahead a little bit. We see here, just for getting us up to date, Ugrashrava Sutta Goswami, the son of Ramahashana, being fully satisfied by the questions of the Brahmins, thanked them and attempted to reply. Then 2 and 3 and 4 are him offering some prayers before he begins. Offering prayers to the Lord, like we'll just talk a little bit about number 4 here to start with. Offering prayers before we begin anything is always highly recommended. You find this again and again and again. We could have a look maybe a little bit later in this class at the situation in that regard when Sukadeva Goswami begins speaking to Maharaj Pariksit. That's the beginning of the 2nd canto, where Sutta Goswami gives a preamble to the situation that he is in, speaking the Bhagavatam to the sages at Naimisharanya in the 1st canto. So this second chapter through to the end of the 1st canto is really Sutta Goswami giving the background that led to the situation where Pariksit Maharaj heard the Bhagavatam from Sukadeva Goswami, and that begins the 2nd canto. And as we know, Sutta Goswami was present there. So we find prayers being offered by all the speakers of the Bhagavatam at various points throughout the Bhagavatam. We have we come back to the situation at Naimisharanya where Shonaka Rishi, as the, let's say, the spokesperson for all of the sages present at Naimisharanya, is asking questions of Sutta Goswami. But he also offers prayers and he offers glorification of the Bhagavatam and so on and so forth as the cantos unfold. And in each canto, we find Sutta Goswami referring to something that Sukadeva Goswami spoke to Pariksit, and very often we find Pariksit asking a question and Sukadeva Goswami responds to that by saying, a similar question was asked at a certain time in a certain place, and then he goes to that situation and describes what's going on, what went on there. And generally speaking, there's some kind of prayer or invocation for auspiciousness at the beginning. Every time we chant the Bhagavatam, we chant this invocation of the Bhagavatam. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. An invocation for auspiciousness. Another term for this is Mangala Charan. And just like we find at the beginning of Srila Prabhupada's Bhagavad Gita as it is, there are several prayers there. Umaganati Mirandasya Gananjana Shalakaya Chakshur Unmilitam Jena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobhistam Stapitam Jena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Dadati Swapadantikam, and so on. You can look them up in your Bhagavad Gita as it is. 1, 2, then Vandeham 3, then Hey Krishna Karuna Sindhu 4, then what's the next one? Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi 5, then Vanchakopa Trubhyascha 6, and then Panchatattva Mahamantra 7, and then Mahamantra 8. 8 prayers all linked together to form what is called the Mangala Charan. Mangala means auspicious. Mangala Charan, to create an atmosphere of auspiciousness. Actually, Srila Prabhupada said about that Mangala Charan of the Bhagavad Gita, my god sister Govinda Dasi explained this, that he told her, if you chant that Mangala Charan of Bhagavad Gita as it is, before you do anything, Sarah, before you do anything, it will turn out well. So also, my wife was very close friends with Mother Jamuna, and Mother Jamuna, when my wife and I were living in England, whenever Mother Jamuna would pass through on her way to or from India, she would stay with us. And she was a wonderful cook, as we all, well, you may not know. There's a beautiful book she wrote called Lord Krishna's Cuisine, The Art of Indian Vegetarian Cooking. It won awards that cookbooks have never won before. The year it was published, it won an award for Book of the Year. It was the first time it was the best cookbook of the year, but the outright best book of the year, which was never heard of before. Anyway, Mother Jamuna was a very humble soul. And she used to, as I said, stay with us, and she would always do some cooking when she was with us. And before she'd go into the kitchen to start her cooking, she'd chant those Mangala Charan prayers. So you can never get enough of auspiciousness. And the most auspicious thing is any sound vibration relating to the Supreme Personality of Godhead and the authorized parampara of pure devotees coming from him. And in that regard, this verse is very interesting. Actually, when I first joined the temple, this is another interesting thing, Subha Krishna Prabhu, you said to me how you would like to chant Jai Radha Madhava at the beginning of every class. And then, of course, we chant the Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. But when I first joined the temple, we all used to chant this verse also. and a couple of other verses I'll point out as we go along. But this one, Narayanam namaskritya narang chaiva narottamam devim saraswatim vyasam tato jayam udirayat. We always used to chant this at the beginning of class. Before reciting this Bhagavatam, which is the very means of conquest, one should offer respectful obeisances unto the personality of Godhead Narayan, unto Narayan Rishi, the supermost human being, unto Mother Saraswati, the goddess of learning, and unto Srila Vyasadeva, the author. There's just a short purport. I'll just read that. Get that up there. All the Vedic literatures and the Puranas are meant for conquering the darkest region of material existence. The living being is in the state of forgetfulness of his relation with God due to his being overly attracted to material sense gratification from time immemorial. His struggle for existence in the material world is perpetual, and it is not possible for him to get out of it by making plans. If he at all wants to conquer this perpetual struggle for existence, he must re-establish his eternal relation with God. And one who wants to adopt such remedial measures must take shelter of literatures such as the Vedas and the Puranas. Foolish people say that the Puranas have no connection with the Vedas. However, the Puranas are supplementary explanations of the Vedas intended for different types of men. All men are not equal. There are men who are conducted by the mode of goodness, others who are under the mode of passion, others who are under the mode of ignorance. The Puranas are also divided. The Puranas are so divided that any class of men can take advantage of them and gradually regain their lost position and get out of the hard struggle for existence. Srila Sutta Goswami shows the way of chanting the Puranas. This may be followed by persons who aspire to be preachers of the Vedic literatures and the Puranas. Srimad Bhagavatam is the spotless Purana, and it is especially meant for them who desire to get out of the material entanglement permanently. So this is a very nice prayer. One little thing I'd point out also immediately about this prayer is that this is the only time that you'll find in Vaishnava literature that it is recommended that we directly offer respect to a demigod, Mother Saraswati, the goddess of learning. It's a little bit like how in the 10th canto we find the gopis going and offering puja to the Katyayani, Mother Katyayani, in order to actually pray that they can get Krishna as their husband. And Prabhupada there talks about how, generally speaking, we don't do this, but because it is directly in relationship to Krishna, we do it. So we're not approaching Mother Saraswati and offering respectful obeisances to her so that we can become learned in any mundane sense. This verse, I'll just go back to it again for a second. This verse is about something very important being pointed out here about the Bhagavatam. As it says, before reciting the Srimad Bhagavatam, this is Sutta speaking, Sutta Goswami speaking to the sages at Naimisharanya, just as he's preparing to answer their initial 6 questions. before reciting this Srimad Bhagavatam, which is the very means of conquest. This purport is very, very instructive. All the Vedic literatures and the Puranas are meant for conquering the darkest region of material existence. Within this darkest region of material existence, it's not that there is no knowledge. We've got so many universities, so many schools, so many primary schools, so many preschools, primary schools, secondary schools, and tertiary educational institutions, all imparting knowledge. But Ishopanishad explains to us, we need to understand there are two distinct qualities of knowledge, two distinct categories of knowledge. There is what is called vidya and avidya. Avidya is knowledge, but it is knowledge in darkness. This material world is a place of darkness. There's Prabhupada gives a very nice elaboration on that point about how sometimes people will say, "Can you show me God?" And then he would say, "You want to see God, but if there's no light, you can't see anything. Your great eye is so great that you can't see anything in the darkness, and you want to see God. You want me to reveal God to you, or summon God here so you can see him. But actually, without the light of the sun, nobody can see anything. And the sun is actually described to be the eye of the Lord. Through the sun, the Lord is seeing everything in the material world. And we all know when there's no light, you can't see anything. So we are completely dependent in our acquisition of knowledge. And unfortunately, in the darkness of the material world, darkness of ignorance of the material world, not only is it a physically dark place, but it is also a place of ignorance, and that is described also as darkness. So this is an area of darkness, the material world. And actually, there's the aphorism from the Vedic literature is the admonition to everyone. Tamasima Jyotirgama. Don't stay in this darkness. Don't stay in this darkness of ignorance, because this is a life that entails the repetition of birth, death, disease, and old age without any actual relief. The verse, the purport we saw there, it's all perpetual. Once we enter the material world, we are completely under the control of the material energy of the Lord. And in the 7th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, there's the famous verse, Devi Yesha Gunamayi Mama Maya Dura Yaya. This divine energy of mind, consisting of these three modes of material nature, goodness, passion, and ignorance, is very difficult to overcome. Actually, it is impossible to overcome. The material world is like an ill-lit labyrinth. I don't know if any of you, especially I think all of those who are on board today who are born here in Australia, grew up going to state shows. either Melbourne, Adelaide, Sydney, Brisbane. They all have what they call the state show, which would be a goods and services exhibition of what was going on in the state. And it was usually in the summer holidays. So all the children would be there, and they would have what they called the sideshows, where you'd go and, I guess you've seen all this at fairs and so forth in India as well, where you have something where, you have to throw the hoop. And if it goes over something, you win the prize, you win whatever it was. And then they have the shooting galleries and so forth. But they also used to have what they called the Hall of Mirrors, which was basically a labyrinth. And you would enter the labyrinth and it was dark. You couldn't see a thing. All of the whole thing would be made up of black cloth, avenues of black cloth, little hallways. You'd walk down and it was black above and black on both sides. And you'd have to try to find your way. Once you were in, you couldn't, once you turned a corner or two, you couldn't find your way out. You couldn't find your way back to where you came in. And then they would have it designed in such a way that they would put a mirror in, or a series of mirrors in such a combination that it would appear that there was a light and that was a doorway for you to get out. And you'd walk down there really getting quite nervous about being in this situation. You'd walk down there and you'd think, oh, I just have to turn the corner. And then suddenly you're looking at yourself in a mirror, and it was a dead end. So I remember being in situations like that in the Hall of Mirrors, where you'd suddenly start to hear someone screaming, "Get me out of here! Get me out of here! Get me out of here!" Ah! And then, of course, the people who ran the show, there were all kind of little back passages behind the passages where they could just come and get you, and then they'd take you out. But I don't think I ever saw anyone actually get out without somebody coming, whether they were screaming or not. You'd come to a point where you just needed somebody to come and take you out of that thing. So it's a very good actual comparison to the situation of the material world. Material world is a giant labyrinth, and it's so perfectly made that once you enter, it's like in science fiction movies, they'll have this wall, and then it'll go, and there's a doorway, and then it closes, and you can't see where the door is. You can't see that there's a door there. So the material world is like that. Once one enters the material world, the condition to enter the material world is that you forget everything about your existence outside of the material world. And then in that condition, you're placed into a situation that you actually don't know anything about. You don't know how you got here. You don't know why you're here. And you don't know where you're going. And this is characterized by a sense of anxiety, which grips us very tightly. So just like that labyrinth, that little labyrinth in that little sideshow at the edge of the state show, we're in the labyrinth of the vast material world. It has upper planetary systems, middle planetary systems, lower planetary systems, countless numbers of planets, each of those planets with its own environment, its own conditions, its own atmosphere, and so many, and each planet actually unique. Actually, where I'm staying here with these people, I'm in this converted, what did I say, container. But the fellow has built a staircase up to the top, and on the top he's built a little kind of sleeping arrangement, or you can just sit there as well. But in the sleeping arrangement, it's all perspex. The walls and the ceiling are perspex, and you can lie there in bed, or you can sit out on the deck at the front with a chair and just look up at the sky at night. It took me right back to my childhood. I was born in rural South Australia, and we used to do that a lot. We'd be out at night just lying on the ground looking at the stars, and you can see the Milky Way. You actually see it's a way, it's a pathway up into a higher situation. And we're just seeing the luminary stars, and there's millions of them. But we also understand there are so many those luminary planets described in the Bhagavatam. They're just those, the luminaries. There are countless numbers of other planets that you don't see. And each one of those planets is a unique situation of residence for living entities. Different species of life are there, and so on and so forth. But they are all characterized by one overriding quality, and Krishna describes that in the 8th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, where he says, Abrahma bhuvanal loka punaravati juna mamo pecha tukuntaya puna janma na vidyate. Puna janma na vidyate. Very nice verse from the Bhagavad Gita. I think we can share screen and have a look at that verse. Where are we? Bring this up. And we'll go to Bhagavad Gita. What do we got here? Oh, 28. Okay, it's verse 16. Verse 16 of the 8th chapter of Bhagavad Gita. Where are we? Here we are. Abrahma bhuvanal loka punar avati norjuna mam upecha tukunta puna janmana vidyate. From the highest planet in the material world down to the lowest, all are places of misery, wherein repeated birth and death take place. But one who attains to my abode, O son of Kunti, never takes birth again. Mam upecha, you see in the word for word, mam unto me, upecha, arriving at me, or reaching me. If one does that, one never takes birth again, even though from the highest planet in the material world down to the lowest, every single planet, all are places of misery wherein repeated birth and death take place. And that's the situation we're in this material world. And that mamupecha is repeated actually from the previous verse. We'll just have a quick look at that. Mamupecha punajanma dukalayam ashashvatam napnuvanti mahatmana samsiddhim paramamgata. After attaining me, the great souls who are yogis in devotion never return to this temporary world, which is full of miseries, because they have attained the highest perfection, which segues very nicely into the next thing that I wanted to talk about. And that the word there is very important, used twice, attaining, because we can fall into the trap in the cultivation of that knowledge by which ignorance is destroyed. We can fall into the mundane trap of how knowledge works in the material world, thinking that we have to achieve some level. And when you get involved in mundane learning, it's very competitive. And it has to be very competitive, because the struggle for existence in the material world is a very competitive one. And we have been in the material world pursuing material desires since time immemorial. And in order to satisfy those desires, we need to compete against other people for the limited resources of the material world. And therefore, we have to get the best standard of mundane knowledge we can get. And that's all about achieving something, acquiring something. But this very means of conquest, which is the Srimad Bhagavatam, this is vidya. This is transcendental knowledge. And it is for everyone, and everyone shares in the same result from the attainment of this knowledge, or the attainment of the goal of this knowledge. Now, the word attainment is actually very different from the word achieve. Achieve means you are able to acquire something material. But attainment means to touch something. You get in touch with something. So just by reciting this Srimad Bhagavatam, we get in touch with the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Srimad Bhagavatam, in that regard, is non-different from the holy name of the Lord. Simply by submissive hearing and chanting of recitations of the Srimad Bhagavatam, we actually conquer over the forgetfulness, the living entity. What's it say here? The living being is in the state of forgetfulness of his relation with God due to his being overly attracted to material sense gratification from time immemorial. If he at all wants to conquer this perpetual struggle for existence, he must reestablish his eternal relation with God. And that is not done by acquiring material know-how, mundane so-called knowledge, and making plans on the basis of that knowledge. None of that will reveal Krishna. None of that will get you in touch with Krishna. The only thing which will get us in touch with Krishna is coming in contact with and staying fixed in transcendental knowledge, transcendental sound vibration. As a result of that, we will eventually, well, actually, we have attained the perfection of life as soon as we do that, because Prabhupada explains just by this process, one is immediately in contact with Krishna. Immediately in contact with Krishna. Now, Bhakti Yoga literally means to be with Krishna. Simple as that, to be with Krishna. To be with Krishna in your eternal relationship with him. And that is all reestablished only by this path, this highest path of Vidya. Just like in mundane knowledge, there's different categories, different levels within every field. You have, like with mathematics, it starts with 1 and 1 is 2, 2 and 2 is 4, and so on. Every one of us, we can all recite our 2 times table, our 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 times table, just without even thinking. Just imagine if we learned Bhagavad Gita verses like that when we were 5 years old. It would be so many years down the road, and somebody would just start chanting a chapter of Bhagavad Gita, and we could chime right in straight away and remember all the verses. But no, we without thinking, we can say 6 times 6 is 36. 12 times 12 is 144. 11 times 11 is 121. And on it goes. But that's just the first level of mathematics. Then it goes on. You will remember. Then you start to learn a little bit of adding, subtracting, dividing, and multiplying. And then you learn a little bit of algebra. And then you learn a little bit of trigonometry. And if you really get interested in mathematics, it goes on and on and on and on and on to more and more higher levels of mathematics. And that's the same within every field. So the same thing applies. The same thing applies with the field of vidya, real knowledge, real transcendental knowledge of the Lord. It begins, actually, in one sense, it begins where it ends. On the transcendental platform, the means and the end are the same. The means is bhakti, the means is the practice of bhakti, and the end is bhakti. And there are different levels of realization, different levels of attainment, for different levels of depth of contact, intimacy of contact with Krishna as we progress along this path. And it is a very simple path. Srila Prabhupada used to say, God has given you an ear. All you have to do is come and hear this. There's no material prerequisite, which is another very important thing, which distinguishes transcendental knowledge, the acquisition of transcendental knowledge, from mundane knowledge. You have to go through, you have to pass each exam and each year to go on to the next level. But Krishna consciousness is not like that. You come and you hear about Krishna regardless of your background. Actually, Prabhupada points out that mundane qualifications in education are actually a stumbling block on this path. Because the problem with mundane knowledge is that you think you know something. You think you know something. But in terms of the truth, the absolute truth, no matter how much mundane knowledge you have, you don't know anything. You don't know anything. Just like any child brought up in Krishna consciousness, just like any child in mundane world, as I was saying, they know they're 2 times table. Any child in Krishna consciousness, you ask, who is Krishna? He'll immediately say the Supreme Personality of Godhead. You ask any mundane person, who is Krishna? They have no idea who this person is. And none of their material education or research or plan making will reveal that. The only way is by hearing from authoritative sources. And by that hearing, anyone can become a highly qualified devotee of the Lord, full of knowledge, full of transcendental knowledge that one is able to impart to others. And it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what your background is at all. It doesn't matter where you come from. It doesn't matter what your age is. It doesn't matter what your star sign is. It doesn't matter whether you're rich or poor, or none of these things apply. Prabhupada used to say, just come, sit, and hear, and you will become highly learned. Actually, there's a very lovely statement in the 13th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita. We'll just share that, and we'll end with that today. In the 13th chapter, where are we? 13th chapter, verse number 22. Come on. 22. 13. There we are. It's a very short purport, this one, but it's a very, very revealing one. The verse is, Purusha prakritisto hi bhunkte prakriti jan gunan Karanam guna sangosya sadasad yoni janmasu. Actually, this is a nice full circle as well, because we have the three modes of material nature mentioned. And like I said earlier about Devi Yesha Guna Mai Mama Maya Duratya, you can't cross beyond the influence of these modes unless you surrender to Krishna. Mam Upecha Kunteya Puna Janma Navidyate. No, what is it? No, what is it again? Devi Yesha Guna Mai Mama Maya Duratya. You very easily cross beyond if you surrender to Krishna. But if you are involved with three modes of material nature, this verse explains what happens. The living entity in material nature thus follows the ways of life, enjoying the three modes of nature. This is due to his association with that material nature. Thus, he meets with good and evil among various species. This is going on. Now, I'll read the purport. This verse is very important for an understanding of how the living entities transmigrate from one body to another. It is explained in the second chapter of Bhagavad Gita that the living entity is transmigrating from one body to another just as one changes dress. This change of dress is due to his attachment to material existence. As long as he is captivated by this false manifestation, he has to continue transmigrating from one body to another due to his desire to lord it over material nature. He is put into such undesirable circumstances. Under the influence of material desire, the living entity is born sometimes as a demigod, sometimes as a man, sometimes as a beast, as a bird, as a worm, as an aquatic, as a saintly man, as a bug. This is going on. And in all cases, the living entity thinks himself to be the master of his circumstances, yet he is under the influence of material nature. How he is put into such different bodies is explained here. It is due to association with the different modes of nature. One has to rise, therefore, above the three material modes and become situated in the transcendental position. That is called Krishna consciousness. Unless one is situated in Krishna consciousness, his material consciousness will oblige him to transfer from one body to another because he has material desires since time immemorial. But he has to change that conception. That change, this is probably one of the most important sentences in the whole of Prabhupada's books. That change can be effected only by hearing from authoritative sources. The best example is here. Arjuna is hearing the science of God from Krishna. The living entity, if he submits to this hearing process, will lose his long cherished desire to dominate material nature, and gradually and proportionately, as he reduces his long desire to dominate, he comes to enjoy spiritual happiness. That's a very nice summation of the whole situation. But this last sentence very clearly illustrates the point I was making about bhakti being with Krishna, meaning being with Krishna. In a Vedic mantra, it said that as he becomes learned in association with the Supreme Personality of Godhead, he proportionately relishes his eternal spiritual life, blissful life. So there you have it. There you have it. Does anyone have any questions or comments? We lost somebody. Who did we lose?
I think there was Suman
Ishita.
and some. Yeah, I think we lost Ishita. Yeah, correct. Also, there was one more couple. I think we lost them as well. So, yeah. So my
You have your
question,
hand up?
I have my question. So
Yes.
that's the reason I raised my. So you said 7.14. Devi Aisha Gunamai Mama Adratya Mami Vaya Prapadyanti Mayami Tantarantite. So this divine energy of mine is very difficult to overcome if you surrender unto. So that if you surrender unto me, that is the caveat that Krishna is talking about. So how one should understand that he is completely surrendered? What is that stage? How one should reach to that stage?
Well, Prabhupada says you can do that in a moment. You can completely surrender to Krishna at any moment. The real thing is, as the last verse said, we have a long cherished desire to dominate the material energy. And we don't give that up easily, unfortunately. And so therefore, Prabhupada says, gradually and proportionately. Gradually and proportionately. Just on that point, when he said you can become Krishna conscious, fully surrendered to Krishna in a moment. But then he said at one time, but that moment may take many thousands of years to reach. Many thousands of lifetimes to reach. It's really up to us. Ultimately, Krishna doesn't interfere. It's our choice. But the point is, you can surrender completely to Krishna in a moment and he will accept you. But you may surrender just 1/10 of 1% and he'll accept that. And when he begins talking about yoga in the Bhagavad Gita, he begins in verse number 39 of the second chapter. It's the first mention of yoga. And it's about working without fruitive results.
Yeah.
He's actually talking, he's making an oblique reference to Bhakti Yoga there. Because in verse 40, he says,
is that Brahman Pradam Brahmavir, Brahmagno Brahmanavatam, Brahmaivate Gantavyam, Brahma Karma Samadhina?
No, I lost it there for a moment. Verse 40 of chapter 2 of Bhagavad Gita.
Yeah.
In this endeavor, there is no loss or diminution. What's the Sanskrit? Where are the pundits? The first line. I need the first line.
Yeah. Esha tehi bhita sankhe buddhi yoge tvaman shunu.
No.
Neba Bikramaha.
Neha Bikrama Nashosti Pratyavayo Navijite Swapamapyasya Dharmasya Trayate Mahatubhyat. In this endeavor, there is no loss or diminution. So even if in one lifetime you can only surrender 1/10 of 1/10 of 1/10 of 1%, the smallest amount, you carry that with you. And Krishna is very kind. He's within your heart, and he arranges for you to carry on from there in your next life. And in this way, gradually, it accumulates. But anywhere along the line, you can just surrender. But as the saying goes, the ball is in our court.
Yeah.
Always. Because we have to choose. Like we see Arjuna actually surrenders to Krishna twice in the Bhagavad Gita. He surrenders in 2:7, where he says, I'm confused about my duty, and I'm overcome by miserly weakness. Please, I'm now a soul surrendered unto you. Please instruct me. He surrenders to Krishna for instruction. Then Krishna instruction, the whole of Bhagavad Gita. And then at the end, when Krishna's given his final summation in the 18th chapter, he says, so now you consider these things and you can do whatever you like. And then Arjuna says, well, now I'm firm and free from doubt and ready to act according to your instructions. He surrenders again. He surrenders in knowledge. So the quicker we can assimilate this knowledge, the quicker we will be able to surrender completely to Krishna. It's all a question of choice, and Krishna never interferes with your free will, because the essence of Bhagavad Gita, the essence of Srimad Bhagavatam is one thing and one thing only: the realization of your lost, eternal, loving relationship with Krishna. Re-entering that relationship and going back home, back to Godhead. And that's all based upon your desire. Is that all right?
Yep. Thank you, Prabhu.
So it's 9 o'clock. I don't want to keep you all from your day of rest, as they say. Is there any other last quick comments or questions from anyone?
Thank you, Bhagavat. I think I'll leave this verse of the Bhagavad Gita 8:22 open on the kitchen table tonight, and hopefully someone will see it.
8:22.
8:22 that you showed us.
8:22.
We were just
Was
reading
it
a moment ago, that you were referring to a moment ago. A living entity in
Oh,
material.
13:22, that is. 13, chapter 13, verse 22.
Oh, sorry.
last one.
Yes, 13:22. I meant 13:22. Sorry. Thank you.
Yes. You never know. Sarah, this might be a major turning point in the spiritual life of your husband.
Yes, that's right.
There's nothing, Krishna says there are 4 kinds of pious people begin to render devotional service to me. And the first is the distressed.
Yeah.
So if you can have any influence over him, and and if he is actually a pious man, which I'm sure he is, then he may well turn a corner.
Yes, that's right. Thank you.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Just depend on Krishna, Sarah.
Yes.
Chetasasa kamani mai sanyashamatpara. I quote these verses so often. 1857, 1858.
Yep.
Actually, it segues into the verse we looked at today, because Krishna says in 58, Machchita savadurkani mat prasada tarishyasi, that if you become conscious of me, you will cross over all the obstacles of material existence by my grace. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Thank you.
Thank you all so much. Lovely to see everybody. Even those who are hiding behind there we are. Rahul, yes.
Harsha is in the
Harsha.
car.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji.
Rahul and Nachi and Mantra Narayani. Hare Krishna, all of you. Thank you all for coming. May the Lord bless you all and keep you all from all harm. And by his grace, we'll all meet again next week at the same time.
Thank you,
Is
Prabhu.
that so for you? Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Everybody who agrees with these sentiments, unmute and say Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna.
Granthara
Thank you
Srimad
very
Bhagavatam
much.
ki
Jai.
Jai.
Jagadguru Srila Prabhupada ki
Jai.
Srimad
Jai.
Bhagavatam Ashraya Prabhu
Hare
ki Jai.
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 Gaur Premanande.
Hare
Hari.
Hare Hare Prabhu.
Hare Krishna.
See you all next week, 8 a.m. in the morning. Until then,
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Hare.
stay blessed.
Thank you.
Hare Krishna.
Bye bye.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Bye.
Bye.